Welcome to another installment of Unraveling Religion. I am your host, Joel Lessies, and it is my great privilege and honor to be with Sarah Hughes today from Rochester, New York. Sarah, how are you?
I'm well, Joel. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. These talks are unscripted, and I just know that in the few conversations that we've had, that how they say, we vibe. Right?
I like it. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you could tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Sarah Hughes. I am a lifelong resident of this area, Rochester, in the greater Rochester area. I have one child biologically. He's 23 years old, which is kind of probably dating me a little bit. I'm not going to say how old I am, but I have worked in a range of fields over the course of my career, but my primary focus is on young people. I'm self-titled the relationship artist.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you. That's the core of everything I do is development of relationships among people and also between people in their places, whether that be within the schools where I work or in the community. I'm recently started looking into different types of social arrangements that are more land-based and, cultivating right relationship with nature, more intentional community, eco-village types of things, or land back movement things with folks that are just kind of reclaiming relationship with the land and working on self-sufficiency and community building that's very specific to place, but not so much the kind of I think we're just very focused on location, like cities and things like that. But
right, why have you chosen this as value, as priority?
Oh, I mean, it's all related. So, I mean,
Yeah.
everything is, right? And we'll get into this more as we start talking about religion and spirituality and those sorts of things about connection. I believe that all things are connected. And I think that's the core message in all religion, really, is interconnectedness, interbeing. And I think that some of the communities that I'm drawn to currently are just better at demonstrating the interconnectedness of all, not just living things, but all beings, like an animistic approach where we honor the spirit and everything and have relationship that is reciprocal with those things. It's very indigenous in its origin, in terms of kind of that animistic sensibility, but it just resonates with me. There's a lot of experiences that I've had in those settings.
So what are some of these experiences, the transcendental experiences? Could you share? Maybe, are there some that come to mind that you'd like to share? Or?
Well, yes. I mean, just recently, this past week, I was able to visit Soul Fire Farm, and it's an Afro-Indigenous community that has sprung up very intentionally through the work of Leah Penniman and her sister, her husband, and their family. And what's special about it is that it's clearly been designed around this concept of reciprocal relationship to land, of acceptance of the importance of, the critters and the life forms in the soil, and rebuilding what was really what they call marginal farmland. Like, it was not very easy to start the farm, but they came into the situation with a very clear understanding of what they wanted to create there. And in addition to rebuilding the soils and creating a no-till permaculture kind of model for growing food in order to feed folks that are living in what they call food apartheid not, I mean, the food desert has been coined as a thing, right? In especially very urban areas, the more poverty inflicted zones of cities where folks don't have access to fresh food. That's called a food desert by the USDA and other people, but they call it food apartheid because that was designed such that folks wouldn't have access. They created conditions for food to be plentiful and nutritious, with a long ranging, it wasn't a short-term thing. It wasn't about turning a profit quickly. It wasn't about any of those things. In fact, the profit is not even a driver at all. It was about creating a community and a place where all of these things could happen to feed the community and also, physically feed them, but also spiritually feed them with teaching around how to be in right relationship with the planet and specifically in this place, to contribute to and receive from the earth in ways that are physically, emotionally, and spiritually fulfilling.
What were some of the feelings that you had that were so?
Well, to begin with, I arrived and it was early in the day and the sun was coming up over the hill and there was the beams of light just landing on the farm, and just like streaming through the trees and landing on all of the buildings and the grass and the hay and the animals, and just the sounds of space it's in a kind of very rural area. So it's now there's no traffic noise. There's no hubbub, really quiet, except for little ones running around laughing like children, dog running around. From the moment I walked onto the farm, I felt this peace, a sense of this is like a chosen place. And it was, it's November. We were expecting it to be cold, dark, rainy day. And it ended up being sunny and beautiful and 70 degrees. At one point, it was like so warm, everybody had to take off all their layers and we're down to t-shirts and tank tops. And this, the smell, just the freshness, a freshness to even the things that are decaying there. The cycle is so tangible, the cycle of life and death, and it doesn't feel unnatural when you're in a setting like that. Even though agriculture, it's been normalized to have a lot of machines and a lot of like fertilizers and all these additives and things. Like when people think of farms, often what they're thinking of is like a large commercial kind of farm, whereas this is just everything's done by hand and everything's done really intentionally and almost with ritual. You know what I mean?
A very fundamental thing that I often talk or share with friends in conversation is that what we are sorely lacking in our community, in our Western industrialized community, is ritual.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so they just build it all into the space. And it's like I said, even before the day starts. So I was there for what they call a work and learn day. And they invite community, volunteers to come in and work on the farm and learn about their practices and learn about their rituals and learn about history, and their current projects and the things that they're planning going forward. It's very small scale, which is intentional as well. But there's this keen understanding that people are curious for sure and interested, but even their volunteer programs are set up in such a way that it's just really well communicated what the intentions are and what kind of expectations there are, not in terms of saying, there's all these strict rules and you need to do XYZ, but it's more like, ensuring that everything they do is consistent with the vision that they have and the practices that they committed to. And if you're coming in as a volunteer, you need to commit to those as well. It just feels like the kind of structure that could replace some of the more destructive things that we have currently going on in the world that for many people is all they've ever known and all they've ever seen. And so I want to amplify and center and hold up these alternatives so that folks can recognize that we don't have to continue living the way that we do, that feels so alienating and so depleting of our energy So on the farm, even just working, I mean, I haven't been as physical as I was, on Tuesday at the farm. And not being, I mean, I've gone for walks and I've gone out in the world, to do those things through the lockdown part of the pandemic. And recently I went back into, school buildings and things like that for work, but it was like, I was concerned that I wouldn't be physically able to do much of what was being asked of me.
Sure,
But
sure.
I was, and it felt very like, I think a lot of people think too, that like working in this way is just hard, toiling, difficult, drudgery work. But you get into a rhythm, especially when there's 30 other people and you're all working together. It felt like community. It felt like this Zen flow situation where you just get absorbed in the task and so focused on doing what you're doing, in concert with all these other people and breathing, in a rhythm. Everything kind of just fell into like a rhythm that felt very comfortable without my having to force it and I wasn't worried about impressing anybody with how much I could do. It was just like to do exactly what I was able to do, no more, no less.
Yeah.
And like take a break when you need to take a break. But, we were all, kind of like one unit.
Yeah.
And we got so much done. It was like astonishing how much work we did in 5 hours. And I was sore afterwards, but in the best possible way. You know how that is. Like when you're working and doing something that's strenuous, but is clearly connected to purpose and clearly connected to others, to the whole, that feeling of wholeness, that feeling of connection was just completely tangible. It was just thrilling. And to meet people I admire who I've seen, on videos and read books and listened to podcasts and watched webinars with these folks that, sometimes we have that tendency too, to think of ourselves as being in a different kind of sphere as those folks that we put on these pedestals. But just to meet the folks that I had seen and know that they're exactly who they appear to be. Like there's no,
there's congruence.
Yes, exactly. And they were just incredibly warm and welcoming, but also very clear and boundaried about, this is our home and, we appreciate the guests being here and just expect that, like I said, that there would be an adherence to the principles and the rituals and the practices that were established there out of respect and real reverence for, the ancestors and those who stewarded the land prior, in terms of acknowledging the indigenous tribes that had lived on the land. And they even have a relationship with the modern progeny of those folks who are now, they were displaced all the way to like Wisconsin. But they have a relationship with the tribe and gave, right of return for anyone from the tribe who wants to re-inhabit the land. It's just like this very congruent level of appreciation and respect and responsibility that, even though they own it, technically, they acknowledge that ownership is not as real as the ancestral provenance of the land.
It feels like they're like a model or an example or like a way shower for the potential for human potential in community.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to leave. I had to, but I didn't want to. And that's I'm going to go visit a few other places. Early on in the pandemic, I connected with an organization called the School for Designing a Society. And I did an intensive online course with them. And they're affiliated with Patch Adams, who's building the free hospital in West Virginia.
Yeah.
The Gesundheit Institute. Yeah. So fantastic folks. I got to meet and get to know Patch and his wife, Susan, a group of other folks who are affiliated with both Gesundheit and the School for Designing a Society, which was amazing. Patch himself is just incredibly down to earth and cool. And all of the folks there were just incredibly creative, very, again, aligned with a particular kind of vision of connection. A lot of folks, of course, who were interested in healthcare and the kind of ridiculous model that we have in this culture that makes healthcare highly inaccessible. And even when it's accessible, it's often very traumatic and cruel. Unfortunately, we don't really have a healthcare system here that's focused on the well-being of people and respecting them for, knowing their own bodies and minds well enough to, play a part in their healing.
Yeah.
And so this was an incredible group of folks, and many of whom are working on an intentional community. And that was another experience that I've had of just like recognizing the reality is there was so much diversity of opinion and thought and experience within the groups.
Yeah. It's just expressed respectfully.
Right. What was alike was this, I think, basic understanding of connection, and that we can't be effective in transforming anything from our own lives to our communities to the world without recognizing that other people and other beings need to be part of it.
Right.
We can't do it alone.
And taken into consideration and cared for.
Right. But I highly recommend that folks look into Soul Fire Farm and the School for Designing a Society. And then one last organization that I want to mention is Pachamama Alliance, which I found to be an incredible community, especially through the pandemic, of folks who've been working for a very long time to bring Indigenous wisdom into the world through a partnership with some of the tribal entities that are located at the headwaters of the Amazon around protecting the environment, which I hate even saying the environment because it creates that separation. Like it's a whole, like, this is the box over here has the environment in it. Like we are all in it. We are all part of it.
This is our home. This is our
home. It's our only home. There is no planet B. There was a time when I thought I had to create a lot of things myself. And again, I think that was born out of that structural separation that we are taught to believe in as young people, because it's trained into us. And there's so many things that I've learned, especially working in the world of education, runs so counter. So there's so much we need to unlearn in order to free up the space to learn new things that are actually aligned with truth. How they fit into the larger narrative is trying to figure out how to fix the world, mainly because there was so much unhealed trauma in myself. And so the isolation that was born out of a sense of distrust of other people, it has gradually given way to the understanding that I've never been alone, and that there is tremendous power in recognizing the models that work, to suit the conditions in my particular sphere of influence in my particular place and time. But I think that the narrative has been shifting from that sense of aloneness to the understanding that there's all this connection out there, and that the ideas that I've had, somebody else probably already had them too, and maybe I should look into it before I go diving headfirst into a whole load of tasks. One of the ways that I dealt with that was reading, right? So, and I was, by 5, I was, reading chapter books. And so school was very lonely for me too, just because so much of what was being taught was something I already knew how to do. So I kind of spent a lot of time in the back of the room by myself reading books. Of course, then the schools want to track you in a particular way and say, oh, gifted, whatever, which then led to even a stronger sense that I was somehow very different from all my peers. But anyway, so reading, though, gave me the sense that, oh, yeah, there's a whole range of experiences and world building and stories that other people have imagined that I can relate to. And then for the ones that I couldn't, I think it gave me a foundation for being incredibly accepting of all different points of view and life experiences.
Can you identify one or maybe a couple moments of illumination that you've had, maybe through reading or other through introspection or a relationship?
When I was an adolescent, going through all the crazy adolescent stuff, which is probably why I'm so drawn to teenagers to this day, because that is the most disruptive, confusing time of life that I experienced. I definitely still relate to teenagers. So I think I must have been 13-ish. I was starting to do some self-harming kind of behaviors. I really was very close to deciding that I couldn't live in the world as it was. So I was considering taking my own life, and I'm like, no, would anybody care? That's kind of how my thinking was going. I was like, no one would care, no one would miss me, all of those feelings. And I remember having kind of an internal voice at that point that said, no, you're meant to do things in your life. There are reasons. I actually discovered philosophy long before I knew what it was called.
Oh.
But I am, because philosophy is the underwriting, worldview behind anything, right? So it's like, yeah. But I started reading the Bible stories and I was like, okay, I get this. And I visited churches with friends of mine in my household that I consider to be also a big part of my spiritual foundation. Was a lot of music of all different varieties. I would say, that in a way the Beatles were a religion in my household. and then Christmas, and we're coming up on the season, right? My mother loved Christmas music, and so no matter what happened to her in the church, we listened to the Messiah every year. I was baking cookies with my mother and listening to the Messiah, and then Nat King Cole, and then a bunch of other, a lot of holiday music. But the Messiah was the one thing that I knew every single year my mother would insist would be played throughout the holiday season. And so I was able to experience that lifelong love of music that has continued ever since. And then also an understanding of the words by when I was reading the stories and then I was listening to the Messiah, I'm like, oh, okay, these are the same things. This is Bible verses that they're singing. So the second moment that I call my grand epiphany that changed my entire life happened in 1999. The Columbine High School massacre took place in April of 1999, and I was a new mom. I was looking at my son, and when the news broke, I had been sitting with my infant child and watching the news and seeing these children running out of the school and the chaos and the panic. It was far away in Colorado, but it felt to me like it was happening to me. And
yes.
I looked at my son and I just felt this tremendous sense of failure to create a world that would be safe for him.
Yeah.
That
sounds like a very both as a highly sensitive person and as an empath, it would make sense that that feeling might arise.
Yeah. So for probably 2 to 3 months after that, I couldn't shake this feeling of guilt and dread that I had, brought a kid into to this world, that, these really shocking. And of course there was a ton of, media after that, just starting to characterize teenagers as dangerous in these ways that have had resonance ever since in really ugly ways. Several months later, I was in the shower. I have some of my best ideas come in the shower, but this was definitely not just an idea. It was like resounding through every cell in my body, kind of similarly to when I was younger, but this idea that you are meant to do something very specific with teenagers. I heard it very clearly. I was like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Then literally the next day, I saw this documentary film on HBO called City at Peace. And it was about this program in Washington, D.C. that worked with teenagers from all around the metro area around issues of racism and sexism and classism and religious persecution and gender identity and sexuality. And I was like, oh my God. And so literally everything in me said that is what I'm supposed to do.
You know when you know, Sarah.
You know when you know.
Yeah.
And it took a while, but 8 years later, I was able to start an affiliate program here in Rochester of that City at Peace program that originated in DC. And I've been affiliated with them ever since. We're about to get ourselves back on track to start it up again. If I see something that I would like to do, I don't put myself into some artificial time frame or create a sense of it has to happen in a certain way or it's a failure. I've realized over the course of my life that there are a great many things that just can't be put in that kind of box, especially when you're talking about, especially life's purpose, meaning impact. Like if you're measuring based on, how long it took or exactly how it looked or exactly who bought into it or believed in it or said, yes, that's good. I'm satisfied with what I've accomplished so far. Doesn't mean I'm done.
Right. I think that's important to acknowledge yourself.
I just think that one of the issues that I see, especially working with young people, is they're so convinced that it's about comparing and competing that it's very difficult for any of the young people that I've worked with to feel like they're okay where they are.
And that they're connected, because the
right.
comparison by its very nature is a cutting off. It's a
exactly.
The comparison is a separation. Yeah.
I will say though, that many of the young people I worked with in City at Peace Rochester, which became the Possibility Project Rochester, and many of the young people I've met in other programs, especially in New York City, because the program specifically builds an understanding of that competitive comparative model being counterproductive and a collaborative envisioning of the world you want and working together with others to create it, that model is protective in many ways, where a lot of the young people that I've worked with in those programs have a very different orientation toward success, which is helpful. But working in the schools in the program where I currently am, so much of the messaging they're getting is win, 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 compete, compete, compete. This second place is still losing, like dumb things like that just drive me up a wall. And I would love to see a wholesale transformation of the education system, but I don't think that's going to happen in the near term. At least I'm just hopeful that it'll happen with a replacement and not just because the whole thing is going to collapse in on itself because it's unsustainable. Yeah. And you can see it in the young people that are there who are living in that environment and being schooled in alternative ways or unschooled even, not even, there's homeschooling, there's unschooling, there's different models. One of the things that I got fascinated with after Columbine too was looking at the educational models that many of our young people are being raised up in and how that contributes to violence. And the lack of choice. Again, I think that I could relate to the sense of hopelessness that young people who do harm to themselves and others are feeling, because I went through that myself. But it never occurred to me to hurt anyone else. There are a lot of influences in this culture that tell young people, especially boys, but I will say that I think it's definitely not as gendered today as it maybe was in the past. That if you're hurting other people is some sort of, I don't know.
No,
ameliorating factor.
It's interesting because I've thought a lot about this, Sarah. I've had my own experiences with people who've caused great harm and suffering to me and to others. And I've really come to a place to, at least today, that it feels like it's the capacity of a soul, if you will, to hold its obstacles and suffering this, the less able one is to handle the traumas and sufferings and difficulties and obstacles of life, the more they are to lash out, right?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. So I discovered philosophy formally in my first year in college. So after I realized I wanted to do City at Peace, I needed to figure out how to become qualified, to start a program. And at the time, like I said, I was a young mom. I was 27 at the time, I think, in my late 20s. And I had dropped out of high school and gotten a GED, and I'd worked a bunch of crazy jobs that none of which were what I was meant to do, of course. But I learned a lot of transferable skills in those jobs, and I'm glad I had them. But I was in no way ready to run a nonprofit program. So I went back to school and went to community college, Monroe Community College here in Rochester, which it was an incredible, great experience. But my first semester, I took an intro to philosophy class. And in that class, I discovered a great many things that, that were in my mind for a long time, but felt like, disembodied things, like they weren't, but suddenly it was like there was a place that was dedicated to the discussion of these ideas about what is truth and what is justice and what is love and what is, what is right and wrong, and like all of this stuff. Right. And also my first philosophy professor ended up being a really good friend and mentor. So that relationship was, I think, also vital to my recognition of the value of studying philosophy as a major, because she was very affirming of my talent and my kind of like my natural philosopherness. And she was also, even though she's teaching philosophy in a secular way, very involved in a church community that she introduced me to, that here in Rochester, that has a tremendous social justice focus. I thought was really cool because, social justice has always been an area of interest for me. And I just, again, didn't realize that there was a lot of organization around it. And there were people here and elsewhere that I could look to as resources around how to transform harm in the culture to justice and care and well-being and connection and love and all the good things, the beloved community, as Martin Luther King would say. So yeah, I started studying under her tutelage and then decided to change my major. I thought I was going to study psychology or behavioral science, that would be the right, kind of background for starting youth development programs. But I thought philosophy was better. And then when I was ready to transfer, I was made aware of a peace and justice studies program at St. John Fisher. So that's where I transferred to do the rest of my 4-year degree. And of course, when I started there, the St. John Fisher being a Jesuit, historically Christian, foundation college, there was a lot of religion iconography and influence, on the campus, even though it wasn't specifically that anymore. But it was definitely present on the campus, the influence of organized religion. And I took some comparative religion classes as well as some courses that were in the religion department, philosophy and religion being kind of lumped together often in academia. But one of the courses that I took with one of the priests, who was, also a professor there, was called Martin and Malcolm. And it was incredible because it was ways to kind of compare and contrast the philosophies of Martin Luther King with Malcolm X side by side, and understanding the Christian theological underpinnings of Martin's civil rights work next to the Islamic underpinnings and also the Black nationalist movement underpinnings of Malcolm X. That was a transformative course for me. And it really helped me to crystallize my understanding around social justice and working with young people who may be quite radicalized one way or the other, like to understand it instead of just like dismissing something out of hand because it sounds too extreme.
Right.
can lead to an unwillingness to hear where people are coming from in ways that I think that
Are
class,
required. I mean,
yeah, it's required if you're
people are
going to get
people.
anywhere. Yeah. Yeah, but like it just, I mean, I guess I hadn't really, until I got to that stage of my studies, really thought about how deeply influential religion is, for so many of those historical figures who I think have been transformative in the culture. Part of me, I think, for a long time just wanted to kind of put it in another box, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep. Right.
but again, compartmentalizing is something we're taught to do, so that we don't have to worry about reconciling the irreconcilable.
Right.
And just like, oh, that goes in that box over there. Then we don't have to deal with it when we're dealing with this thing over here. And more, I was recognizing the areas in which I needed to integrate, in order to be effective at knew I was meant to do. So yeah, philosophy wise, I think I wouldn't describe myself as belonging to any particular school of thought, because again, I think that that's the drive to compartmentalize and the drive to name and identify is all about
Just curiosity. Just
right,
curiosity.
just
openness.
curiosity. Like my religion is love, and
Yeah.
my philosophy is love,
Yeah.
and my practice is love. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the theme of everything, and relationship is about love. When I talk about love, I think yeah, sometimes people, the immediate connotation is that kind of fuzzy romantic rush of feeling kind of love, and the kind of love I'm talking about is what Valerie Kaur would call a revolutionary love.
Yep.
It's about laboring for a better, and not even better, a just, loving, warm, welcoming, willing world. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like, where everyone understands their connection. That doesn't mean there's no conflict ever, and conflict is really important to understand as something generative. It can be,
Yep.
anyway.
Both conflict with others and within oneself. Yep.
Exactly. The point of conflict is, I think, to generate a different level of understanding, a closer connection, and like you were talking about before, humility and willingness to reciprocate, right? If
Yep.
we're not being in, I feel like, again, the conflict averse nature of our world, like most people will consider the person raising a question to be causing a problem. Right?
That's kind of like an unspoken in our culture.
Right. If you weren't already a named authority, if you're the named authority, then you're allowed to bring up anything you want and determine the course and, list all of the things that everyone else needs to do. But if you are not the acknowledged named authority and you raise your hand and say, have you considered X, then folks will automatically consider that to be some level of disrespect because you're not giving deference to the authority. And this is, again, one of those things that I think is deeply influenced by religion, that folks don't necessarily understand the connection. But we do have, I think, we have created a lot of structures that are attempting to imitate what many people believe to be the hierarchy of authority from God down. Yeah. So I'm anti-hierarchy. I believe that there are multiple roles that folks play. And among those would be what we might consider an administrative or managerial role, or depending on the size of whatever endeavor someone's trying to take on, or a group is trying to take on. There might be multiple managers, right? But that doesn't mean it's automatically a higher level position or a position in which the manager gets to tell other people what to do without their agreement. Fostering agreement, again, this is it goes with the conflict thing. Like, to get to agreement, you need to be willing to wade through some messy stuff. And
that's always done with truth, genuinely, authentically, and in congruence.
100%. So, I mean, I think people are looking for, I think there's quotes in this about the Bible, and I'm sure I'm not quoting it properly, but talking about the straight and narrow, the even, that path does not really exist, if you are looking to deeply connect. And like, it's a messy, swerving path that, and we could get into we could talk about this for literally days, But I think there's so many misinterpretations of those stories back to the literalism of certain sects and groups. The official authority level structures to allowing another interpretation of these, sacred, supposedly, texts. And there's also the obvious bias to Western civ. Like anything that came out of Western philosophy is held up in a certain way, and of course that's very selective, just like it is with religion. People will pick and choose what they want to use to support whatever position they have at any given time. But the the introduction of indigenous philosophy, as it were, like at least the worldview, an ontology of indigenous wisdom and animism, like none of that was introduced in my world, until I was either presented with materials from a class, or I discovered in my research for a paper or something else, there's this. And I always wanted to try to find the lesser known sources. Well, that's where we feel God the most, right? Most of us, I was thinking too about how many folks that I know who are just incredibly driven career-wise and other things, but like all they do is post or write about how they can't wait to go hiking, or they can't wait to go to the beach, or they can't wait to do this or that. Yeah. And they've been convinced that in order to earn the rest and the connection that they feel in those natural settings, that they need to just grind themselves into dust every day so they can earn the vacation. But it's like, what if you could be there all the time?
What is time? What is breath? What is life? Right? Like, I mean,
yes,
we're on these tracks of habitual behavior through messages from our culture that are just not in congruence with what we are and who we are and what we're meant to be doing.
And like our culture. And I think there's, like, when we talk about culture, I want to clarify a couple things, because there's specific, like American culture, but I think worldwide, if you're looking at kind of the core features of culture, there really is one dominant culture at this point. And, it's materialist, and it's consumerist, and it's power driven, and it's hierarchical. And that exists everywhere that is quote unquote civilized. And then there's those indigenous communities that still exist, and those communities that are building now based on indigenous principles. And I would say that those are like the two main cultures. There's the taker culture, the materialistic, consumeristic, hierarchical one, taker culture. I'm using Daniel Quinn's terminology here. Yep. And then there's leaver culture, which is like, leave it alone. Like leave what is, because it's sacred, and be in a reciprocal right relationship with all.
With honoring and reverence. Yeah.
With honoring and reverence, understanding that spirit is in everything, and it's all connected to us. And when we harm that which is quote unquote outside of us, we are harming ourselves.
Yeah, that's just a basic tenet. That's the true law.
So yeah, that was another life changer for me, is Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, and all of his subsequent works. I've read every word Daniel Quinn ever wrote, I think, including all of his like obscure little things that he wrote, because he wrote a ton of little parables and stories that I think are really powerful. But he wrote a number of books, and I read all of those. Unfortunately, he died a few years back, but I was in touch with his widow because I'm writing a book myself, and I asked her what if there was a process for getting permission to quote him or to use any of his material in my own writing. And she was like, she looked at my blog, and then she said, it's clear that you're writing in the spirit of Daniel, so don't worry about it. It's all good.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I studied anthropology, sociology, all these other things. But when people talk about culture, in many cases, they're using it in a way that is really more about fashion or trend or, popular culture. versus, kind of a way of life,
Right. Right.
which is the way I think about culture.
So Sarah, in summary, are there things that would you like to summarize, or some like last thoughts, or
Well, what I would want to say to the listeners is, you know, I do respect and I value and honor all of the different ways that people show up in
Yep.
spirituality. And I want to make clear, I mean, I know I sound, sometimes very sure of myself and opinionated about things and whatever. But as I indicated earlier, I think there's so much value in having conversations and differing viewpoints to come together and grow from that to a higher level of connection and understanding. And so I hope that that's something that the listeners are doing in their worlds with their people. And I would definitely invite anyone who is interested to connect with me. My blog is called mamasarahsays.com with hyphens, and I'm always interested in connecting with folks that want to have interesting conversations.
I have a little surprise for you. I want to close with a closing poem.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah, and are you familiar with Eagle Poem by Joy Harjo?
I have heard it. Yes.
Yeah, and it goes like this: Eagle Poem. To pray you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you, and know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know, except in moments steadily growing, and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky and wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion. Like eagle rounding out the morning inside us, we pray that it be done in beauty, in beauty.